Great, 3 more tooltips. Okay, and these two are fine, but I don't like where this one is, because notice that it goes beyond the screen. And to fix this, we can align it not with the center of the button, but align its right side with the right side of the button, which is easier than it sounds. And also we'll learn a pretty cool trick how to add this toggle behavior to show and hide the profile menu when we click on the avatar without using JavaScript, so it's going to be just HTML and CSS. First, notice that this tooltip is inside this button with the profile menu button class. And we will use this to override certain properties of the tooltip. For that, let's copy the class, and inside header.css file, let's create a new CSS rule and target the class. Then we'll use the descendant combinator to target only the tooltip that's inside the profile menu button. We can also use the child combinator here instead, like this. Both are fine here, but I think using the descendant combinator here makes our component more robust in case we change the HTML inside the button and nest the tooltip somewhere deeper inside it. Okay, if you remember, in our first CSS tutorials in this course, we talked about specificity of selectors in CSS, and that we can use it to override certain styles of an element in case we want. And because this CSS selector is more specific than this CSS selector, and it's more specific because we're using 2 classes instead of 1, and so because this CSS selector is more specific, we can override any of these properties, if we want, inside this CSS rule. And first of all, here we want to set the right property to 0, so that the right edge of this tooltip starts where the right edge of the button is. But we also need to reset its left value, because if we leave it like this, then the tooltip will have its right property set to 0, and also its left property will still be set to 50%. You know what? Let's see what it's going to look like if we leave it like this. And when I reload the page, and okay, not good. This is because when we set both the left and right properties, the browser stretches or squeezes our tooltip to fit those properties. And if we want to keep the original size of the tooltip, we need to reset the left property. For that, we can set the left property to auto here. This changes the left property only for the profile menu button tooltip and doesn't change it for all the remaining tooltips. And now if I reload the page, that fixed the width issue. So now the tooltip width is fine and it's fully visible, but it's too far to the left. And this is because here we're also moving the tooltip 50% of its width to the left. And so to fix this, we also need to reset the transform property for the profile menu button tooltip. And to reset the transform property only for the tooltip, we can set its value here, transform, to none. And now if I reload the page, great. Now the tooltip is displayed where we want it. It's fully visible on the screen and its right edge is aligned with the right edge of the button. And also because in this rule, we're targeting only the profile menu button tooltip and changing some of its styles. So these affect only the profile menu button tooltip, but the rest of the tooltips work as usual and their center is aligned with the center of the corresponding button. Great, and with this, I think that we're done creating these tooltips. So congratulations, we've done a good job. And hopefully now you can see how CSS positioning helps us create these nice looking and useful elements. Next, let's go ahead and create this nice looking profile menu. We can hide and show the menu by clicking on the avatar. And we usually use JavaScript to achieve this behavior because we need to track the state of the component and toggle the state when our users click the avatar. And in this course, I assume that you don't know JavaScript yet, so we'll use a cool trick to achieve this behavior with just HTML and CSS. And we've already discussed almost everything you need to create this profile menu. For example, we created a container element similar to this one for the search dropdown. And you saw how to use the absolute and relative position to place it where we want it, and also how to add shadows and rounded corners, and so on. So I'm not going to go into detail here about what we've already discussed, and I'm going to focus on new things, where the main one is how to make the profile menu appear and disappear when we click on the avatar here. And to achieve this stateful behavior, we'll use a label, HTML element, a checkbox, and a clever CSS selector. First, let's quickly refresh our knowledge on how to use labels with checkboxes and how to connect them in HTML. For that, let's go to our index.html, then find the profile menu button, and after the profile menu button, we'll add a new label element with some label text inside. And next to the label, let's add an input, and it's going to be a checkbox. And this will result in this on our page, where we can check and uncheck the input, and this label does nothing at the moment when I click it. Now remember that in HTML, we can connect a label with an input so that when we click on the label, it affects the input. And to demonstrate you this, let's connect these two. To connect them, we'll need to add an ID to the input, and let's call it something like profile menu visibility checkbox. Remember that this ID must be unique on the page. Only one element on the entire page can have this ID. And so it's better to use more descriptive names for your IDs. And then we'll use this ID value for the for attribute in this label. And so to connect a label with an input, we must use the same value for the for attribute inside the label and the ID attribute inside the input. And now they should be connected. Let's check this, and I'm going to reload the page. And now if I click on the label, notice it toggles the checkbox. This means that they are connected. An important side effect here is that now we can move the label in our code and they still will be connected. So for example, let's move it somewhere here after the content div. Reload the page, there's our label. And now notice that when I click on the label, this toggles the checkbox, which means that they are still connected. So as long as the for attribute of this label matches the ID attribute of this checkbox, they remain connected. Now let's experiment with this even further. What if we move this label inside the profile menu button, for example, here? Okay, I'm going to hide the Explorer to have more space. And what if we now, instead of this text inside the label, place the avatar image like this? And let's remove this extra line. Okay, and now if I reload the page, the label text is gone. And if I click on the image, notice that it still toggles the checkbox, which means that the label is still connected to the checkbox. Great. Next, let's add a div after the input, and we'll assign it with a class right away, and we'll call the class profile menu. And we'll also put some initial text. How about just profile menu? And if we reload the page, there it is. And if I click on the avatar image, the checkbox gets checked or unchecked, and nothing happens to the profile menu text. But what if we wanted, for example, to make this profile menu text green only when the checkbox is checked, and to keep it black when the checkbox is unchecked? Is this possible in CSS? Well, yes. And let me show you how we can do this. For that, we'll add a class to this input, and we'll call it profile menu visibility. And we'll use this class to target the checkbox from our CSS. And so I'm going to copy the class name and add a new CSS rule like this. And I think that you already know pretty well that if we want to style the hover state of an element, we can use the hover pseudoclass like this. And for checkboxes in CSS, we have another pseudoclass, and it's called checked. And so when we write it like this targets only the checked state of the checkbox. And now we can apply our styles to the checkbox only when it's checked. And so if I write color green here and then reload our page and toggle the checkbox, nothing has happened. Well, this is expected because our checkbox, even in its checked state, has no text inside. And so this color property does not change anything here. Besides, we don't want to style the checkbox itself. We want to set the green text color of the profile menu text. And this text is inside the div that follows the checkbox. And if we look closely, we'll notice that this div is actually a sibling of this checkbox. And because it goes after the checkbox, we can use the subsequent sibling or tilde combinator to target the div when the checkbox is in the checked state. And if this all sounds complicated, let me just show you the final selector in our CSS code. So when the checkbox is checked, we want to use the subsequent sibling combinator or tilde to target the profile menu div and set its text color to green. And now if I reload the page, this should do the trick. And if I toggle the checkbox, notice that the profile menu text is now green. And if I uncheck the checkbox, the profile menu text becomes black. So this is how you can style other elements based on your checkbox's state. Okay, this is interesting, but how does this help us to show and hide the profile menu when we click the avatar here? Well, first of all, notice that because we have connected the label to the checkbox, now when we click on the avatar, it toggles the checkbox, which affects the profile menu text. And also, we're not limited to only changing the text color. We can set any CSS property we want, including the display property. So, for example, we can add display none here to hide the profile menu when the checkbox is checked. And now if I reload the page and toggle the checkbox, notice that this hides the profile menu. And if I untoggle the checkbox, this shows the profile menu. And also we can do the opposite. I mean that we can hide our profile menu like this, display none by default. And this is wrong, so let me remove this period. So this will hide our profile menu text by default, and then we can change this to block to show the profile menu when the checkbox is checked. And now if I reload the page, the profile menu is hidden, and if I click on the avatar, this shows the profile menu. This means that we have achieved the most important part of what we wanted. We can hide and show the profile menu by clicking on the avatar. The only problem is that we can still see the checkbox. And the good news is that we can hide it easily without any harm to this functionality. So let's hide the checkbox. And for that, we can target the checkbox by its class name like this and copy this display none style or definition and reload our page. The checkbox is hidden by default, and so is the profile menu. And now if I click on the avatar, notice that this shows the profile menu. And if I click on the avatar again, this hides the profile menu, which is exactly what we wanted. And this is how we can keep the state of our profile menu inside our checkbox without using any JavaScript. And for that, we use a label and a checkbox. We connect those with the for attribute and the ID attribute. We hide the checkbox with display none, and we use the subsequent sibling combinator to toggle the visibility of the element that we want to show or hide. Great. Now notice how the layout shifts. I mean how these buttons move when we toggle the profile menu visibility. And we don't want this to happen. To fix this, we can use absolute positioning. For that, I'm going to add position absolute here. And okay, this is better. Next, it would be great to see the boundaries of the profile menu better. So let's add a white background and also this shadow and also round corners to the profile menu. And it's easy. We can just inspect the profile menu element here. Let's resize the developer tools. We need to set border radius to 10 pixels, and let's copy the box shadow value right away. And then here we'll write box shadow like this, and then we'll paste the value. Then we'll set border radius to 10 pixels and also background color to white. And when we reload our page, let's show the menu. And okay, this is better. Next, let's position the menu properly. I mean, let's position it like here, so that the right edge of the menu is aligned with the right edge of the button. And it's also is slightly below the header border. And because we are already experienced users of the DevTools, we're not going to guess those values. We'll just use the DevTools to get the values. So we'll need to set the top property to 50 pixels and the right property to 0. And it's top 50 pixels, right 0 pixels, and reload our page. And now the profile menu, well, it's not positioned properly. Why is that? Well, because our div is absolutely positioned, and these two properties work either relative to its closest parent with its position set to relative, or if there is none, they work relative to the page itself. And we want this profile menu to be relative to the profile menu button, but they are siblings. So even though the button itself has the relative position, it's not useful for our case because we need a parent of the profile menu to have relative position. So for example, this header action list item. And notice that the shape of the button, I mean, this button and the shape of the list item on the page, they have the same shape and the same position. So we can change the position of this list item to relative, and this should do the trick. And now it doesn't have any positioning applied except for the default position. And I think that we can safely change the position property of all these header actions and set it to relative. And for that, we're going to use this class and add a new rule to target all header actions, and we'll set position to relative. And now if I reload our page and show the profile menu, notice that it's positioned properly because now the profile menu is positioned relative to the header action. Okay, next, what I notice here is that our cursor is not a pointer when we hover over the avatar. And this is because we added the label element here. I mean, this label element. And we can easily fix this by adding a class to this label and then a CSS rule that sets its cursor to a pointer and hover. So let's do this quickly. I'm going to add a class to the label. It's going to be header action avatar label. We'll copy the class and then we'll add an hover rule where we'll change its cursor value to a pointer on hover just like this. Perfect. Next, notice that the profile menu currently takes up as little width as possible, and this is because its position is set to absolute, and it tries to match its width to the width of its closest parent with the relative position. So this is the same issue that we had with our tooltips. And we fixed this for our tooltips by using the white space property and the no-wrap value. And that worked because our tooltips have only one line of text. But as you can see here, our profile menu has multiple rows. So we'll need to use something else to fix this issue. And another way to fix this is to explicitly set the width of the profile menu. Let's do this. I'm going to get the width from the reference page, and it is 256 pixels. Next, inside our rule, this rule that targets our profile menu container, we'll add width 256 pixels. Then reload the page, and this is better. What I also noticed here is when the profile menu is visible and we hover over the avatar, the tooltip becomes visible, which looks ugly. And in this scenario, we can fix this and hide the tooltip with a clever mix of different CSS selectors and combinators. And to do this, first, let's think in detail how we want this to work. So, when the profile menu is displayed, that is, when the checkbox we made invisible is checked, and when we hover over the avatar, we want the tooltip to stay hidden. But when the profile menu is not displayed, that is, when the checkbox is unchecked, we want this tooltip to be visible just like now. This means that we only need to hide the tooltip when the profile menu is visible, that is when the checkbox behind the scene is checked. Now let's look at our HTML code and what selectors we can use and what elements we need to target. Okay, so this is the checkbox that controls whether the profile menu is visible. And we're using the subsequent sibling combinator to target the profile menu. And we described a moment ago that we also want to use this checkbox to determine whether to display this tooltip or not. So how about we move this checkbox up here so that we could use a subsequent sibling combinator to target both the tooltip and the profile menu. Okay, first let's check whether the profile menu toggle functionality works, and it works. And this works because notice that despite that we moved the checkbox away from the profile menu, the checkbox and the profile menu are still siblings, and the profile menu still goes after the checkbox in our code. And so this is sufficient to use the subsequent sibling combinator to target the profile menu. But now what we also can do is use the subsequent sibling combinator to target the tooltip in the following way. We can start from the checkbox, then use the subsequent sibling combinator to include this button, because this button is also a sibling of this checkbox and is located after the checkbox. Then we can use the child or the descendant combinator to go inside the button and target this tooltip. And again, this is less complicated than it sounds, so let me show you. We want to start our selector from this checkbox, so I'm going to copy its class name, and we'll start a new CSS rule here. Then we'll use the subsequent sibling combinator where we want to target this button. So I'm going to copy this class name and paste it here. Then we want to go inside the button. So I'm going to type space to use the descendant combinator. And then we want to target this tooltip. So again, I'm going to copy its class name and paste it here. This tooltip is a direct child of the button, so both the descendant combinator and the child combinator would work here. We will use the descendant combinator because it gives us a little more flexibility to nest the tooltip as deep inside this button as we want it to. And then we want to hide the tooltip, so display none. Now let's quickly go over this selector. So here we want to start from the elements with this class name. Then we're using the tilde combinator to target only their siblings that go after these elements in our HTML code and also have this class name. And then inside these elements, we want to target only the elements with this class name. And so it's like start with these, find these, then on the same level as these, find these that must go after these. And then inside these, find these tooltips and apply these styles. But remember that we want to hide the tooltip only when the profile menu is visible. That is, when this checkbox is checked, so when it's checked, and also only when we hover over the button. And this selector still works just as we discussed previously, but requires the checkbox to be checked and also this button to have the cursor over it. Okay, now let's see whether our smart selector works. So reload the page. When I hover over the avatar, the tooltip will appear. Good. And when I click, the profile menu appears and the tooltip is gone. Perfect. So this means that our selector is working properly. Okay, and if you feel that you don't understand this selector or any other complex CSS selector, you can just break it up into pieces like this, and then think about each piece and add one by one until you can easily understand the whole selector. And even though I created this selector, when I look at it as a whole, I feel like, wow, this is too complex and I am probably too stupid to understand it. But when I go through each part individually, then suddenly I feel like I can understand this. Okay, let's see what we can do next. I think that at this point we've covered all the new things needed to create the profile menu. And what's left is to fill our profile menu with this content and style the content. I mean, we'll need to add and style these menu items. And actually, you already know how to do this because we have created similar components before. And so this is a perfect opportunity for you to practice everything we've learned so far. And because my main goal in this course is to help you build your HTML and CSS skills, I'll ask you to create and style these menu items yourself. And I'm going to give you a few hints on how to approach this. First, we use a div as a container here. I would recommend changing this to an unordered list and using the li elements for each menu item. Then notice that the avatar with the online indicator is the same as the one we created here. This means that you can use the same approach to create it. Then to organize your menu items like this or like this with 2 or more elements in one row, you can use Flexbox just like we used Flexbox to style the recent search items here in the dropdown. Then, to create this menu item, when we have this little subcomponent with this icon and this text inside, you can put these inside a div and turn the div into a Flex container. And remember that we can nest Flex containers inside each other without any restrictions. This means that we can make this whole menu item a Flex container, and then we can make one of its children a Flex container as well. Then you can handle the hover and active states for your menu items in the same way as we handle them here. And as for the icons here, you can download them directly by right-clicking on them and then using the saved image as, or you can open the course assets page, I mean this one, and the link will be in the description, and use the icons from this page where I collected all the images from the Reddit page for you. Okay, so roll up your sleeves and get to work. Don't skip creating this profile menu. It's going to be hard, but trying to code is probably one of the most important things that you can do to build your coding skills. If you don't practice coding, you have very high chances of ending up in the so-called tutorial hell, where you spend a lot of time watching tutorials, but you're not actually building your skills. Okay, and finally, if you get stuck, don't worry, maybe take a little break and then use the development tools to inspect this reference page to see how it's implemented under the hood. Or you can check out the earlier tutorials of this course where we created similar components. Now pause this video and write some code. I'll create the profile menu as well, but I will speed up this part of the video. Okay, this beautiful profile menu is ready. I hope you've created it. If not, this is a perfect time for you to pause the video and do this exercise. And now I think that we have finished creating the whole header component. Congratulations! The only thing that's left is to make sure that the header is fixed at the top, like here. But for now, we don't have enough content on our page to be able to scroll down. So let's make our header fixed at the top after we create the main section of the page. Because at that point, it's going to be easier for us to test that. And now we'll move on to creating this sidebar.